The nurse said 3 words that stopped my heart before the machine ever could. Don't sign anything. She pressed the clipboard back into my hands so fast the pen rolled off the tray table, and by the time I looked up, she was already gone, disappearing behind a curtain like she'd never been there at all. My daughter was in the hallway on her phone. My son-in-law was filling out forms at the nurse's station, signing his name where mine should have gone. I had 11 seconds before someone walked back through that door, and in those 11 seconds, 43 years of running a machine shop taught me exactly one thing worth knowing. When a stranger risks her job to warn you, you don't ask why. You listen. My name is Walter Kowalski. I'm 68 years old, and until 8 months ago, I ran the tightest precision machine shop in Erie County, Pennsylvania. 43 years of tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch, of knowing that a part either fits or it doesn't, that there's no such thing as close enough when a bracket has to hold a man's weight 300 feet up a bridge span. I built that business from one rented garage bay and a second-hand lathe into 41 employees and a building I owned outright. And 2 years ago, when my wife Doreen passed, I sold it. Not because I had to. Because for the first time in my life, the shop felt quieter than my house. And that's saying something. I live alone now in the same brick 2-story on Poplar Street where I raised my daughter Renee, where Doreen and I painted the kitchen yellow the week we moved in, and never once repainted it, because she said yellow was a promise, and promises don't get repainted. Renee moved back in with me 6 months ago. Her and her husband Craig said it was temporary, just until they got back on their feet after Craig lost his position at the insurance brokerage. I said, of course. What else does a father say? I gave them the whole upstairs, kept myself down in what used to be Doreen's sewing room, and told myself it was good, having people in the house again, having voices at the dinner table. It didn't stay good for long, though I was slow to see it, the way you're always slow to see a crack in your own foundation because you built the house and you trust the house. It started small. Craig began handling my mail, said he didn't want me getting confused with all the predatory senior scam stuff flooding mailboxes these days. Very thoughtful of him, he said, smiling that smile that never quite reached his eyes. Then Renee started coming to my doctor's appointments, sitting in on conversations with my cardiologist that used to be just between me and Dr. Okafor, taking notes on her phone, nodding along like she understood things I hadn't even understood yet myself. I told myself this was what family did. I told myself a lot of things. Then came the dinner, 3 weeks ago now, when Renee set down a plate of pot roast in front of me. Renee, who I hadn't seen cook a full meal since she was in high school, and said, in a voice pitched just a little too carefully, "Dad, we've been thinking. You should really see a specialist about your heart. Somewhere with more resources. Somewhere like the Cleveland Clinic." "Cleveland's 4 hours away," I said. "Okafor's 15 minutes from this table." "It's a great hospital, Dad," Craig said, not looking up from his plate. "Top-rated cardiac program in the country. We'd drive you, make a weekend of it. You, me, Renee. We could even stop by that steakhouse you always talk about on the way." I set my fork down slow, the way I used to set down a micrometer when a reading came back wrong, and I needed a second to figure out whether the part was bad or the instrument was. "That's a long drive for a checkup I can get down the street." "It's not just a checkup," Renee said, and there it was, the smallest hitch in her voice, gone as fast as it came. But 43 years of listening to machines tell me the truth before the operator does had trained my ear for exactly that kind of hitch. "They do a full cardiac workup, overnight monitoring. It's thorough, Dad. We just want you taken care of." I looked at my daughter, 34 years old, and saw for 1/2 a second the 4-year-old who used to fall asleep on my chest in the recliner while Doreen finished the dishes, and underneath that, something new, something calculating. I didn't want to see it. I want you to understand that. 43 years of tolerances taught me not to trust denial, but nothing in 43 years taught me how to look at your own child and admit the machine's reading no longer matches the part you thought you built. "When would this be?" I asked. "Saturday," Craig said, too fast, the way a part comes off the lathe too fast when somebody's rushing the cut. "We already called ahead, got you an appointment." "Without asking me first?" "We wanted to surprise you," Renee said, in a good way. That night I sat alone in Doreen's sewing room, in the chair I'd moved down there because I couldn't stand sleeping in our bed without her, and I thought about the word surprise, and how in 43 years of business, the word surprise never once preceded good news. Every surprise I ever got in that shop was a supplier missing a shipment, a customer walking on an invoice, a part failing inspection after I'd already promised it to a client. Surprise was a word people used when they'd already decided something, and were only now getting around to informing you. So I did what I always did when a machine started running rough. I watched it. I didn't shut it down. I didn't confront it. I just watched, and I waited for the pattern to show itself, because a machine that's about to fail always tells you before it fails, if you're patient enough to listen. I noticed Craig had stopped bringing me the mail 3 days running. I noticed Renee had started making calls out on the back porch, door shut, voice low, and coming back in with her face arranged into something pleasant before she was even all the way through the door. I noticed the folder on the kitchen counter one evening when they'd both stepped out wills, trusts, and estate planning, a law firm name I didn't recognize. Halloran and Voss and I noticed that when I picked it up, it was empty. Somebody had already moved the contents somewhere I couldn't find them. And I noticed 3 nights before that Saturday drive that I overheard Craig on the phone in the garage where he thought the running dryer would cover his voice, and it did cover most of it, but not the part where he said, "The policy's already been adjusted, I told you. It just needs one more signature, and we're clear," followed by a laugh that had no warmth in it at all. The kind of laugh you hear from a man who thinks he's already won. I am not a man who scares easily. 43 years, running a shop full of men and machines that could take your hand off in half a second if you stopped respecting them, taught me that fear is just information. Your body hands you before your brain catches up. So instead of panicking, I did what I would have done if a customer's part came back failed. I started documenting. I kept a small notebook in my shirt pocket habit from decades of walking the shop floor, and I started writing down times, dates, exact words, because a part that fails inspection needs a paper trail, and so I was beginning to understand. Did a father who suspects his own daughter. I packed for Saturday's trip the way I used to pack for a business trip when I still didn't fully trust the people I was traveling with. I put my medications in my own overnight bag instead of letting Craig load it in the trunk like he offered to. I told them I wanted to bring my truck separately, follow behind, in case I needed to leave early for anything, and I watched Renee's face do something complicated when I said it, something between disappointment and recalculation, before she smiled and said, "That was fine, Dad. Whatever's easiest for you." We left Saturday morning, 2 vehicles, mine trailing theirs down Route 79 south toward Cleveland. Renee had texted me the hospital's address the night before, Halloran Cardiac Wellness Center, some private facility I'd never heard of, not affiliated with any hospital system I recognized, though I didn't catch that detail until later, when it was already too late to matter for how the day would unfold. The waiting room had that particular hush that expensive places pay extra for, soft lighting, a fish tank nobody was watching, magazines nobody was reading. Craig checked me in at the desk, while Renee sat beside me, her hand on my knee in a gesture that used to comfort me, and now made my skin prickle like a wire carrying current it shouldn't be. A nurse called my name, Kowalski, Walter, and led me back through double doors, into a small pre-exam room, told me to change into a gown, and someone would be right with me. That's when it happened. That's the moment I need you to understand, because it changed everything after it. I was sitting on the exam table in a paper gown, my folder of insurance, information, and personal history on the tray table beside me, when a nurse slipped in, not the one who'd led me back, a different one, younger, her name tag said Priya, and she moved like someone who'd trained herself to look calm while her hands were shaking. She glanced at the door, checked the little window in it, and leaned in close, pretending to adjust my blood pressure cuff. "Don't sign anything they give you today," she whispered. "Nothing. Not intake forms, not consent forms, not anything with a signature line. Do you understand me?" "What's going on?" I said low, matching her volume without knowing why my body already understood this needed to stay quiet. "I can't explain right now. Someone's coming. Just trust me. Please." And her hand found mine for 1 second, squeezed once, hard, and then she was gone. Out the door. Gone so fast I almost convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing. I sat there with my heart going harder than any cardiologist would have liked, staring at that closed door, running through everything I knew about my daughter and her husband, and the folder that had gone missing from my kitchen counter, and the phone call in the garage about a policy needing one more signature, and I thought, this is not a coincidence. This is a pattern completing itself. The doctor who came in, a man who introduced himself as Doctor Halloran himself, which struck me as strange. Since the founding doctor of a wellness center rarely does routine intake exams, personally had a clipboard full of forms and a pen he offered me before he'd even listened to my heart. "Just a few standard consents to get started," he said. "Smooth as anything. Guardianship coordination paperwork, in case we need a family member to help manage your care plan, purely precautionary." Guardianship. The word sat in that little room like a dropped tool, loud and wrong. "I'd like my daughter to review this with me first," I said, keeping my voice as easy as I could manage. 43 years of negotiating supplier contracts, teaching me exactly how to sound unbothered, while every instinct I owned screamed the opposite. "Family policy. We don't sign things alone." Something flickered across his face, there and gone. The specific look of a man watching a plan run 12 seconds behind schedule. "Of course," he said. "Take your time." I didn't sign. I told him I was feeling dizzy, which by then wasn't entirely a lie, and asked for a few minutes alone to compose myself. The moment the door shut, I got dressed faster than I have in years, folded that consent paperwork into my jacket pocket instead of leaving it on the tray, and walked out that door with my heart pounding harder than any cardiac monitor in that building could account for. Renee was in the waiting room, and the look on her face when she saw me dressed and walking toward the exit wasn't relief. It was something closer to panic, the particular panic of watching a result fail to precipitate, though I wouldn't have had that phrase for it then. Craig stood up too fast from his chair. "Dad, where are you going? You haven't finished the intake." "I need some air," I said, and I kept walking, out through the sliding glass doors into a parking lot full of cars that all seemed, suddenly, like they belonged to a world I no longer trusted. And I got into my truck and I drove. I didn't drive home, not yet. I drove 2 miles to a diner off the highway, sat in a corner booth with black coffee I didn't touch, and pulled the folded consent forms out of my jacket and read them properly for the first time, hands not quite steady. 43 years of reading contracts before I signed them, the only thing keeping my eyes moving line by line instead of shutting down entirely. It wasn't a cardiac consultation consent. It was a petition for medical guardianship, drafted with my name already filled in, a section for family co-petitioner, already signed, in Renee's handwriting, dated 4 days earlier. 4 days before I'd even agreed to this trip. They'd had this ready before they ever asked me to come. I sat in that booth a long time. The waitress refilled my coffee twice and I never touched either cup. And somewhere in that stillness, the same stillness I used to fall into on the shop floor, when a whole production run had gone wrong and I needed to find the root cause before I could fix a single part of it, I made a decision. I would not confront them today. I would not call the police today, though God knows I wanted to. I would go home and I would find out exactly how deep this went, because 43 years in that business taught me the same lesson twice. You don't shut down a failing machine until you understand every part that's failed, or you'll spend the rest of your life wondering what you missed. I drove home ahead of them, since they'd stayed behind to finish paperwork, which I now understood meant scrambling to explain my disappearance to Dr. Halloran, whoever he really was. I let myself into my own house, and I went straight to the file cabinet in Doreen's sewing room, where I kept every important document of my life: insurance, deed, retirement accounts, and I spread it all across the dining table the way I used to spread blueprints when a whole production line needed rethinking. It took me until 2 in the morning, but I found it. A change of beneficiary form on my life insurance policy, $610,000, a number Renee had asked me about, almost casually, over dinner 2 months ago, and I'd told her, because why wouldn't I tell my own daughter, dated 5 weeks back, moving the policy from the Erie Community Trades Foundation, a scholarship fund I'd endowed years ago for kids who wanted to learn a trade the way I once had, over to Renee Marie Vance, her married name, sole beneficiary. My signature at the bottom was close, very close, but I've signed my name on invoices, contracts, and payroll checks for 4 decades, and I know my own W the way I know the sound of a bearing that's about to fail, and that W had a hook at the base I have never once made in 68 years of writing it. Forged. I kept digging, and the floor kept dropping the way it does when you pull one bad part and find the whole batch is compromised. Bank statements showed transfers I'd never authorized, small enough at first that I'd have missed them if I hadn't been looking. $4,000 here, $6,000 there, $22,000 total moved out over 3 months into an account I didn't recognize. A power of attorney document, my signature forged onto it too, granting Craig authority over my finances, in the event of incapacitation, except the date on it was current, not conditional, like it had already been quietly activated somewhere I couldn't see. And in a folder I nearly missed, tucked behind old tax returns, medical evaluation paperwork from a psychiatric practice I had never visited, describing a patient me with early-stage cognitive decline, memory lapses, disorientation, all of it fabricated, all of it stamped with a physician's signature I'd never heard of, on letterhead from a clinic that, when I looked it up later, shared an address with Halloran Cardiac Wellness Center. They hadn't just wanted my money. They'd spent months building a paper version of me, a version whose mind was already going, so that when the real petition landed in front of a judge, nobody would think to question it, and if I ever objected, my objection would just be filed away as more evidence of the very decline they'd invented. I sat alone at that table at 3 a.m. and said it out loud to the empty kitchen, because Doreen used to say that saying a hard thing out loud is the only way to make yourself really believe it. My daughter is trying to have me declared incompetent so she can take everything before I die naturally of old age, on her own timeline instead of mine. I did not sleep that night. I sat with the photograph of Renee at 6 years old, gap-toothed, holding a fistful of dandelions she'd picked from the crack in our driveway and presented to me like they were roses from a royal garden, and I let myself grieve, the way you're allowed to grieve, something that's still alive, but isn't what you thought it was anymore. And then, the way I always did in that shop when a bad batch came through, I put the sentiment away and I got to work. By morning I had a plan, and the first call I made was to a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but a woman named Sandra Ferreira, recommended by an old shop foreman of mine, whose own mother had gone through something similar 2 years back. An elder law attorney with 22 years of experience and a look on her face, when I finally sat across from her with my folder of evidence, that told me she'd seen this exact machine before, wearing a different family's face. "This is well documented," she said, flipping through my notes, my photographs of the forged forms, my dated notebook entries. "Better documented than most attorneys get in 6 months of discovery. Mr. Kowalski, do you understand what you're describing? This isn't just fraud. Depending on what else surfaces, this could rise to attempted elder endangerment, possibly worse. If that clinic and that guardianship petition were designed to get you declared incompetent and then, functionally, disappeared into a system where nobody checks on you again." "I understand exactly what I'm describing," I said. "I want to know how deep it goes before we do anything about it." She nodded slowly. "Then we build it quiet, and we build it airtight, and we let them keep digging their own hole. That's the smart way. But Walter, they're going to escalate when they realize the guardianship petition stalled. People like this don't stop, they speed up." She was right. Over the following 2 weeks, I lived a performance I am not proud to have needed and will never regret giving. I let Craig believe I hadn't noticed anything. I let Renee help me with my pill organizer, watching a small camera I'd had installed inside a smoke detector in the kitchen, a legitimate security company, full audio, cloud storage, only I could access capture, her handing me the wrong dosage twice, always with a soft, patient voice. Always, "Just double-checking things for you, Dad." And I began to understand that some of what looked like forgetfulness on my part over the past 2 months hadn't been forgetfulness at all. I had a locksmith quietly rekey the file cabinet, and a small safe I bought and bolted to the floor of the sewing room closet, told nobody, moved every original document into it. I opened a new account at a credit union across town that neither of them knew existed and began redirecting my own retirement disbursements there, slow enough not to trigger questions, following the exact patient math I'd once used, shifting production lines without ever stopping the plant. And I found, one night, the conversation that told me everything, coming faintly through the kitchen vent from the dining room above, where Renee and Craig sat with the television on for cover, their voices low but not low enough. "He's slipping more," Craig said. "I heard him repeat himself twice yesterday. That's good. That's exactly what Halloran needs to write up for the follow-up filing." "He didn't sign, though," Renee said, and there was an edge in her voice I hadn't heard directed at me before. Not exactly panic, something colder. "We needed that signature, Craig. Without it, the co-petition falls apart, and we're back to square one on the guardianship. So we get it another way. Halloran can get a second doctor to sign off without him. Costs more, but it's still faster than waiting for him to die of natural causes at this rate. 68, healthy heart, he could live 20 more years, Renee. 20 years of us renting an apartment on my salary while daddy's money sits in accounts we can't touch. Don't, Renee said. And for 1 second, one single second, I let myself believe there was some part of my daughter still fighting this. Don't call it that. What? The truth? Craig's voice went harder. You said yourself he's getting in the way of everything. You said it. Silence, then Renee, quieter. I said he was getting in the way. I didn't say I wanted him gone. There's a difference. There isn't. Not anymore. Not since the insurance form. You signed that form, Renee. You're in this exactly as deep as I am. I sat on the basement stairs with my headphones in, recording every word onto the small device I'd hidden in that vent, and I felt something in my chest that wasn't quite the heart trouble doctor Okafor had always gently worried about. It was colder than that, and steadier, and it didn't hurt the way I expected betrayal to hurt. It felt, more than anything, like watching a part finally fail the inspection you'd suspected it would fail from the very first measurement. 3 days later, a woman named Priya Anand, the nurse from the wellness center, called Sandra's office, having found the firm's name through the same lawyer network Sandra had quietly reached into. Once word travels in small enough circles that a nurse who'd risked her license once might be willing to risk it again for the right reason, she agreed to meet. She told us, sitting in Sandra's conference room with her hands wrapped around a coffee cup she never drank from, that 6 months earlier her own uncle had gone through the same clinic, the same guardianship pipeline, and had died in a state-run facility 11 weeks after being declared incompetent, and that she had suspected then and could prove nothing, and had carried that helplessness every day since. When I saw your intake file, she told me, your daughter's handwriting on that co-petitioner line, dated before you'd even agreed to come in, I recognized the pattern. I'd seen it before I could name it. I wasn't going to stay quiet twice. She gave us internal scheduling records showing that Halloran's Wellness Center had run at least 7 similar guardianship track intakes over 18 months, several involving the same family member as both the referring party and the co-petitioner, a pattern that, once laid out on Sandra's whiteboard, looked less like a cardiology practice and more like a factory line, each elderly patient, a part being processed toward the same predetermined outcome. We filed everything at once, 3 weeks after that recorded conversation through the vent, once Sandra had assembled a case so layered forged signatures verified by a document examiner, the fabricated psychiatric letterhead traced to an office that didn't legally exist, the unauthorized transfers documented transfer by transfer, the recorded conversation, Priya's internal records, and 7 other families. Sandra's team tracked down, once we knew the pattern to look for, that the county prosecutor's office opened a joint investigation the same week, folding Halloran's operation into a fraud case that, we would later learn, had been quietly building against him from 2 other counties already. Renee was arrested on a Tuesday morning. I was not in the room. I could not make myself be in the room. Sandra called to tell me, and I sat in Doreen's sewing chair, and I did not feel the triumph I thought I would feel. I felt the specific, exhausted quiet of a man watching a bridge he'd engineered finally take the load it was rated for. No more, no less, and grieving, even so, that the bridge had ever needed to be tested at all. The trial took 4 months to reach a courtroom. I will not walk you through every hearing, every motion, every delay, because you did not come here for a legal transcript. You came here for the truth. And the truth is this, Dr. Halloran, whose real name turned out to be Marcus Voss, was convicted on multiple counts of elder fraud, conspiracy, and practicing medicine under a revoked license, and is currently serving 11 years in a Pennsylvania state correctional facility, with the prosecutor's office pursuing restitution claims from 6 other families his clinic had targeted. Craig received 7 years for conspiracy to commit fraud and forgery, with the judge specifically noting, in sentencing, that his own recorded words, 20 more years of daddy's money sitting in accounts we can't touch, showed a level of premeditated intent that made leniency impossible to justify. Renee received 4 years, reduced from what the prosecutor originally sought, because in the end, when it came time for her to speak, she did something I did not expect, and did not ask for, and have still not fully made peace with. She stood up in that courtroom, and she looked at me, and she said, I let myself believe it wasn't real, that it was just paperwork, that Craig would handle the parts I couldn't stomach. But I signed that beneficiary form knowing exactly what it was, and no amount of telling myself I loved my father changes what my signature says I was willing to let happen to him. I don't expect him to forgive me. I don't think I've earned the right to ask. I did not speak at her sentencing. I had already said everything I had to say to her 3 weeks earlier, in a letter I mailed to the county jail. 4 sentences, no more. Because 43 years of running a shop floor taught me that the men who mattered never needed more than 4 sentences to understand exactly where they stood. I wrote, "You were the best thing I ever built, and I built you with my whole life. I don't know how to hold both truths at once, that I love you, and that you priced my death. I am not required to forgive you for you to still be my daughter. But you will have to build whatever comes next without my signature on it. I still live in the house on Poplar Street. The kitchen is still yellow. I go to the shop I sold, sometimes, on Sunday afternoons, and the new owners let me walk the floor for old time's sake, and I stand there among the lathes and the smell of cutting oil, and I think about tolerances, about how a part that's off by even a few thousandths of an inch will fail eventually, quietly, at exactly the moment you're depending on it most. Here is what this whole thing taught me, and I want to hand it to you straight, the way I'd hand a young machinist a tool I trusted, because the reason I'm telling you any of this at all is that somebody listening tonight needs to hear it before it's too late for them, the way it almost was for me. Love and trust are not the same measurement. You can love someone with your whole chest and still owe it to yourself to verify what they're doing with your name, your signature, your accounts, your body, especially the people closest to you. Especially them, because they're the ones positioned to do the most damage before you ever see it coming. So here is your homework, and I mean this plainly. This week, call your insurance company. Ask them to read your current beneficiaries back to you, out loud, and ask them to flag your policy so that any future change requires your direct verbal confirmation. Takes 10 minutes. Most people haven't checked in a decade, and the people counting on that are usually closer to you than strangers. And sit with the harder question, the one I still turn over some nights in that sewing room chair. Of the people who love you most, who could tell a courtroom the exact dollar value of your death without hesitating versus how your Tuesday actually went, take your time answering that. I did. Now, friend, I want to hear from you. Put a 1 in the comments if you think I was right to stay quiet those 2 weeks and build the case in silence instead of confronting them the night I found that forged form. Put a 2 if you think I should have gone straight to the police the moment Priya warned me in that exam room. Put a 3 if you think a father is owed one honest conversation, face to face, before the law ever gets involved, no matter what the evidence says. I've turned this over for months now, and some nights I still don't know which answer is right. Tell me where you're listening from tonight, and what time it is where you are. And if a stranger has ever put themselves at risk to protect you, when the people who were supposed to weren't looking out for you at all, or if you've ever caught that one wrong flash of feeling cross a face, you thought you knew completely, I want to hear about it below. Somebody reading this tonight is sitting at their own dinner table, doing math they don't want to do, wondering if they're imagining things. They're not imagining it. They're paying attention. If this one meant something to you, stay a while, and I'll see you in the next one.